Shri Rama Jai Rama, Jai Jai Rama Om. 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 Ramdas Speaks, Volume 3. Now it is Lectures of Swami Ramdas. France. Darshan of Sri Ramana Maharishi. In response to his prayer, he, in a mysterious way, took Ramdas to Tiruvannamalai, where Sri Ramana Maharishi lived. One morning, after reaching Tiruvannamalai, the sadhu who accompanied Ramdas took him for the darshan of Ramana Maharishi. Ramdas went and stood before the Maharishi, but the Maharishi did not say anything to him. He, however, poured his wonderful grace through his eyes into Ramdas, which caused a thrill in his body and made him, for the time being, forget everything by raising him to a state of inexpressible ecstasy. After the darshan of Ramana Maharishi, God prompted Ramdas to go up the hill of Arunachala, a place where the Maharishi had lived for many years, performing austerities. Ramdas went up the hill and found a small cave in which he stayed for 20 days, all the time repeating the mantra given by his Guru. At the end of 20 days, when he came out of the cave, he found his eyes filled with a strange light, and he could behold everywhere the divine in all his splendor and glory, in the trees, in the stones, and in all things before him. He was so much fascinated by this vision that he cried out that he saw Ram everywhere. He went about like one mad, embracing the rocks, the trees, and even a passerby there. In this state of frenzy, it was nothing short of frenzy that seized him. He felt he had gained that vision for which he had prayed to Krishna, whose darshan he had in Mangalore. As a result of that vision, a veritable fountain of bliss was opened in him. Since then, he has been bathing in bliss. Even now, it continues to pour out day and night. He is immersed in an ocean of joy which is so vast and deep that it baffles all description. The purity which was gained by Ramdas after that vision is unparalleled. God is everything. He knew when he was made to enter the path that he would, by the grace of God and through continuous repetition of his name, attain a high state of purity. But when he got it, he found that every desire within him was completely destroyed and his heart became crystal pure. He was filled so much with joy and love that there was no room for any impure desire or attachment. This was something unimaginable. He was completely divinized in body, senses, mind, intellect, and every aspect of his being. Thereafter, he used to go about from place to place, extolling the greatness of God's name. He told people who gathered round him that by repeating the name of God, one could attain the highest spiritual eminence and realize the divine presence, joy, and peace, and that one's heart thereafter would surely float with love towards the whole creation without any distinction of race, caste, creed, color, or nationality. Now the whole universe would stand transformed before one's vision as God Himself. There is a Mahavakya in the Upanishads which aptly describes what Ramdas' experience is. Verily, all this universe is Brahman. Wherever you turn, it is He, up, down, this side, that side, and in all directions you have the vision of the divine, because you have been made first to see the divine within you. In the early stages of his struggle to attain Him, he was oblivious of the world and he was lost in Him. After that experience, he could behold the whole universe as the very expression of God. He feels one with everybody. The lesson of the House of Mirrors. In this connection, Ramdas remembers an example given by Swami Ramatirtha. In order to have some fun, a man got innumerable small mirrors and had them fixed up in his room on the walls, in the ceiling, and on the floor. There was not an inch of space where there was no mirror. After closing the door, he switched on the light and stood in the middle of the room. He saw himself reflected in myriad forms in mirrors, above, below, and on all sides. He enjoyed the sight very much because he loved to see himself everywhere. After having had this fun for a while, he left the room but forgot to close the door. His dog entered the room a few minutes later and it saw its own reflections in the mirrors. The dog started barking at its own reflections and started jumping and fighting with them as it thought those dogs were different from it. It fought till it got completely exhausted and fell down dead. So, man in a state of ignorance, when fighting with other people, thinks that they are separate from him. When he realizes that all forms are the images of his own self, instead of quarreling and disliking them, his heart will pour out love equally to all of them. It is then that the truth of Jesus saying, "Love thy neighbor as thyself," is confirmed. Loving your neighbor as yourself is not possible unless you know that you are not different from him. If you have the vision of the Atman, you see everyone as the manifestation of your own self. This is the supreme vision of the divine everywhere, the vision of the immortal manifested as the entire universe and all the forms, creatures, and beings in it. Fellowship with God. To the question whether God is personal or impersonal, Ramdas' answer is that God is at once personal and impersonal. You can behold Him as everything and in everything in the universe. At the same time, you maintain a close relationship with Him in His personal aspect. He becomes your constant companion. You can talk to Him, you can play with Him, and you can even joke with Him. He will be so intimate with you. He will protect you in ever so many ways and look after you mysteriously. This is true not only in the case of a particular devotee, but is equally applicable to all devotees in all parts of the world who have surrendered their lives to Him entirely. In such cases, He grants the devotees His universal vision and still remain their constant companion. So, He is an impersonal person, that is, He is not only the all-pervading, nameless and formless reality, but He is also all that have names and forms. As your constant companion, He guides you and looks after you just as a mother looks after the child. You feel His protection every moment of your life in a strange way. You can look upon Him as your father, comrade, or master. How this is possible is very difficult to describe. We have read such things in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. He used to have darshan of some living images of divinity. He even played with them. But if you try to understand this by the help of the poor intellect, which has only a very limited capacity, you cannot comprehend how these things are possible. On the higher plane, higher spiritual plane, you can actually experience this. Ramdas himself is having that experience, but still, he cannot tell you what that impersonal person is like. Very often, Ramdas tells friends that Ram told him this and that. You'll find even in his books how he had conversations with him. People wonder in what way Ramdas talked to him and how he responded to his feelings, impulses, and talks. This is a wonderful thing, but it is there all the same. God, the unerring guide. Ramdas remembers one thing, that all through his sadhana, God was guiding him in a mysterious way from the very beginning. He knew it. It was God who gave him strength, and it was by His grace he could boldly walk on the path, hold on to Him, and attain the goal. When the goal was attained, he found that he was taken on the path unerringly. God took him straight to Himself and gave him the all comprehensive knowledge of Himself as personal and impersonal, as Purusha and Prakriti, and also as Purushottama. Purusha and Prakriti at once and beyond, is the all comprehensive and all transcendent Godhead. God had taken him to this height, and he found that he could be experienced in every aspect. Therefore, it is said that moksha is of various kinds, and all are to be enjoyed simultaneously. You can see Him, you can be one with Him, you can be at the same place where He is, and you can be like Him. Shiva and Shakti. In the course of his sadhana, he realized that continuous remembrance of God, which the Hindus call smaran, complete self-surrender, which means offering yourself entirely to God and thus freeing yourself from the ego sense, and the universal vision are all one and the same thing. Constant remembrance of God does not permit of the continuance of the ego sense persisting in you. Self-surrender necessarily dissolves the ego sense, with the result that you come to know that you are not the body but the all-pervading, static and silent Brahman. This realization at once grants you the vision of the whole universe as the expression of that all-pervading and static Brahman. Then it is that you see everything as Brahman. You realize that the manifestation is He, and the unmanifest, all-pervading substratum of this manifestation is also He. These two aspects you ultimately see as one, as they are not separate. They are described as Shiva and Shakti. Shiva is a static aspect and Shakti is a dynamic aspect. These two aspects coexist and you see no distinction between them. Now you are completely free from ego sense and you become the embodiment of divinity. Your actions are the actions of the Shakti. And you yourself are not the individual but the all-pervading Brahman. It is said in the Bhagavad Gita that then you do actions as if you are not doing anything, As Brahman, you are inactive, and as Shakti, you are active. So you act and at the same time not act. This is action in inaction, and inaction in action, as the Gita teaches. How these two can go together cannot be easily comprehended. It was in this spirit that Arjuna was advised by Lord Krishna to fight. He was made to know that he could do all actions in the battlefield and still remain as if he had done nothing at all instead of abandoning the fight. This is a great lesson as to how we should live and act in this world. This requires the knowledge of the Purusha first, and then we do all actions as Prakriti, and such actions leave no impression on the Purusha who is only a spectator, inspiring Shakti to create, preserve, and destroy. As body, we are Prakriti, and as Atman, we are Purusha. If we realize this truth, we can be free and still be active in the world. Our actions will be of universal significance because they are done by the universal Shakti. Two kinds of bhakti. Now Ramdas is going to speak to you about two kinds of bhakti. One is called Gauni Bhakti and the other is called Parabhakti. Gauni Bhakti means preparatory bhakti. In this state, the devotee forms a relationship with God and looks upon Him as master or mother and himself as servant or child. He struggles day and night to remember Him constantly so that he may see Him. In this effort, necessarily, his mind gets more and more detached from the sense objects. There are so many alluring objects in this world, and when the attachment to these is loosened, the mind is drawn more and more towards God and gets engrossed in His remembrance and meditation. The struggle at this stage is very keen. So, out of bhakti springs vairagya or dispassion, a kind of inner recoil from the objects of the senses which had held the devotee in bondage so long. After he had gradually got himself free from the clutches of these low desires, he approaches the divine through complete surrender. Self-surrender brings about the union of the soul with God to such an extent that the devotee loses his individuality and identifies himself with and merges in the universal spirit. The result is he knows that in essence he and God are not different. This is called jnana, self-knowledge, or knowledge of Brahman. But for the devotee, this does not seem to be the end. He wants to retain the bhakti in him and wishes to maintain the relationship with God as master or mother. Thus, he reaches the state of parabhakti in which he beholds the whole universe as the manifestation of his beloved and looks upon him as father, mother, friend, comrade, or master, and upon himself as child, friend, or servant. In this attitude, he continues to have constant companionship with him even after attaining the vision of the impersonal and the vision of the universal. In this relationship with God, he retains a sense of duality with the sole object of enjoying the bliss of communion by talking, singing, and hearing about Him. If you want to enjoy the bliss of love, there must be two. When you lose yourself in the divine completely and dissolve your individuality, there will be nobody to enjoy the bliss of love. If you become sugar itself, you cannot know the taste of it. You have to become the ant to taste the sugar and enjoy its sweetness. So, after becoming sugar, you remain separate from it, become an ant and eat it. So, also the devotee, after realizing oneness with God, still remains separate from Him in order to express his love of God in various kinds of service. This is considered by devotees as the highest achievement because the joy they get by this communion is so rare and sweet that it is beyond comparison with anything else, even with the joy of moksha or liberation. Therefore, the devotee says, I do not want moksha, but I want to remain ever your child. Moksha is not a thing to be attained, but this relationship is an exalted and sweet acquisition. So the devotee remains separate from God, just as Jesus felt, I and my Father are one, yet I am son of my Father. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa realized his identity with Kali in its impersonal aspect. Still, he wanted to remain a child of the mother, as in that relationship he was able to enjoy bliss by talking so lovingly about her. What is grace? Now, Ramdas is going to speak to you a few words about grace. Without grace, nothing can be done by us. Many people think that we are doing everything by our own will and strength. This is utterly false. It is the divine grace alone. It is the divine power alone that is responsible for our doing anything. Since we do not know that divine grace is working through us and we think that we are doing everything ourselves, all our actions, thoughts and feelings get vitiated. When we root out the ego sense and God's light and power flow in us, we become conscious that the divine power is responsible for all our movements and actions. It is by God's grace alone that our mind turns towards God. We become conscious of His grace, and that also is because of His grace. How can we otherwise remember God? We do not remember Him and are not conscious of Him for several years in our life, and suddenly a day comes when our mind turns towards Him. It is He who awakens us. Some attribute it to our past samskaras. Ramdas can say this that by divine grace alone we are drawn towards Him. It is rightly said by a devotee, O God, I remember you because you remembered me first. If He had not remembered us first, it would not have been possible for us to remember Him. So His grace must work in us so as to make us seek Him and ultimately realize Him. Even the first glimmer of the desire to find Him comes to us by His grace. If we want to make His grace work with greater force in us, we must contact a saint and accept him as our Guru. He teaches us that we are mere instruments and that God is the sole doer. God possession. When Ramdas started on his first pilgrimage, he felt God had possessed him. People asked him why he had to go. Ramdas only knew it was all God's will. When this consciousness fully dawns, grace has descended on you in all its fullness, and you begin to feel you are nothing and God is everything. This supreme state can be got through God's grace alone. God and Guru are not different. Many people think that the Guru they have accepted is only a human being. In fact, God, who has awakened you from within, has come in a human form to guide you on the path, to infuse into you spiritual strength so that you may know the fullness and supremacy of grace. Surrender comes automatically by grace. As the grace begins to work in you, And as you become more and more conscious of it, your, your ego sense leaves you just as darkness is dispelled by light. So, grace comes to you from God within you and also from God without you. God without is your Guru. They are one and the same. It is their combined grace that removes all obstacles on the way and dispelling all darkness or ignorance in you makes you an illumined being. So, grace is all that you need, and you can get it by contact of saints. In some cases, when you are not awakened within, contact of saints awakens you. In the presence of a saint, you become a changed person. From that time, your only aim will be to realize God. So, grace alone can save you. There is no other way. Grace is so powerful that it can act on any person, whether fit or unfit. If fitness is the condition for the working of grace, it cannot be all powerful, as in that case, you can say you attain God by your own merit. Grace must be so powerful that it must make the unfit fit to receive it. So you can turn your mind towards Him through His grace alone by the contact of saints. Then God will take you up just as a mother takes a baby up. You have simply to cry, "O God, lead me towards you and make my mind always dwell on you." If you pray in this way, grace is bound to come to you. Open your heart before saints. If you are sincere and earnest in your aspiration for Him, you will surely come in contact with a saint who will shower His grace on you and awaken you. He will guide you on the path till you reach the goal. When you go to a saint, keep the window of your heart open so that His influence, His grace may enter into you, and dispelling darkness gives you inner illumination. You must be humble and guileless. Then you will certainly receive the light that you seek. Ramdas felt after he received the grace of the Guru with the mantra that he was a mere automaton and some power within him was making him do everything. He went all over India, tossed about like a dry leaf. Ramdas went to with any person who called him and did anything that any person wanted him to do. He never cared to ask what sort of person he was and why and what for he wanted Ramdas to go anywhere or do anything. He actually looked upon all as his beloved Ram. Within and without, he was seeing the same beloved, and he never felt he was doing anything by himself. Some higher power or some higher powerful being having possessed him and taken him entirely unto himself. Ramdas felt that he was only an instrument. There is no barter in grace. When grace came, there was a sudden change in Ramdas' life, which transformed him completely. Grace did all things. He never did anything to obtain or deserve grace. Ramdas can tell you about the song of an Indian devotee who asked God, "Are you a merchant? You want me to perform japa crores of times before you can give me darshan? You give me something in return for something. This is barter. If you are really gracious, you must shower your grace on me even if I do not do anything to deserve it." A man engages a laborer and makes him toil in his garden for the whole day. In the evening, he pays him, say, 300 francs. Can you call it grace? The man has, after all, paid the laborer only his wages. If he tells the laborer that he pays him 300 francs as a mark of his grace, the laborer will retort that it is not his grace but only a recompense for his services. If it is to be grace, it must be given even if the laborer has not worked for it. Grace must spontaneously flow out of love and kindness. We are not to toil for it. Ramdas never felt he deserved it in any way. When he received grace, he knew it was only due to the compassion of God. Om Sri Rama Jai Rama Jai Jai Rama Om Sri Rama Jai Rama Jai Jai Rama Om Shri 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 Rama Jai Rama Jai Jai Rama Om Om Shri Rama Jai Rama Jai Jai Rama Om Shri Rama Jai Rama Jai Jai